What's up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode 27, a regular podcast, YouTube video, web series thing. I hope everybody had a good holiday season, and now that that's behind us, the State of Wild will be back on a more regular schedule. And speaking of regular, we've got a regular co-host joining us tonight. Corbett, how you doing, dude?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. I had a great time over the holidays, so that was nice. And yeah, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. I also enjoyed the holiday season. This week's been a very, very long week. I thought 2021 was supposed to be a lot better, but it hasn't turned out that way just yet. But before we hop into talking about wild news and everything like that, just a reminder to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy our content. It is free and it does actually help us a lot. But yeah, let's just go ahead and dive right on into kind of the big elephant in the room. We got Nerf announcements and Nerfs introduced into the client today, and we only got two, kind of surprisingly. And one of the big targets was actually a big surprise in Edwin, something that everybody thought wasn't ever going to get nerfed. It was just going to get rotated eventually. Edwin went from a 3-mana 2/2 to a 4-mana 2/2. The text remained the same. I'm going to go ahead and read out the dev notes from Alec. He's done a really, really great job in the past. Somebody we've always looked to give a little bit of insight on why they made the changes. And they included that in the patch notes this time. The last few weeks have been the best Edwin has ever performed as an individual card, the highest win rate in multiple rogue archetypes. Alongside cards like Foxy, Fraud, and Shadow Step, the frequency of early 8/8 or 10/10 Edwin Bank leaves have reached a point where we are no longer comfortable with. Edwin's mana cost is increasing by 1 to weaken some of the powerful openings at Rogue's disposal. We were planning on rotating Edwin out of Standard in a few months, and they still are, but they want to evaluate how the rest of Rogue's kit performs without this very powerful iteration of Edwin. Cards like Foxy, Swindle, and Price Plunder are important pieces for future expansions and card interactions, so we will be keeping close tabs on how they perform with the influx of new cards and Edwin's nerf. Yeah, so Edwin going from 3 to 4. Miracle Rogue was one of the best decks alongside Evolved Shaman in Standard, so it kind of makes sense that they're hitting this. But from a wild perspective, I think this nerf is a little bit sad, but isn't really going to change the meta all that much, right? Because we had seen the emergence of shuffle rogues. You had a bite weak combo rogue. He'd been seeing a little bit of play, right, thanks to Foxy, Fraud, and Swindle. And going from 3 mana to 4 is a big deal in Wild. But do you really think it's going to have that big of an impact on the format?
Well, no, because of course, like no one's really playing that much Edwin stuff. I do think that it does limit. Well, it would limit Rogue down the line, but they're going to be changing it back, right? They're going to be changing it back in 3 months. So, any like sort of, potential for it to sort of inhibit what Rogue can do, that's just going to be, back to normal. I am a little bummed out because I have been playing with some Edwin stuff in Wild, but not many other people are. But yeah, I think this change, it is like in a very short time frame in terms of like the nerf happening now and when they plan to sort of send Edwin on his way. But I think it makes a lot of sense, right? I think like Foxy and Swindle and Prize Plunder are the cards that are noted in the patch notes. I think those are all really good foundational pieces for Rogue. And they feel very Rogue. They kind of give it a very distinct flavor and stuff, and they're strong build arounds. And, I think they're fine mostly when they're not, in combination with a 10/10 Edwin on turn 2 or something like that. So yeah. I'm happy with this nerf compared to something like Foxy. I just expected them to do Foxy. But I'm happy that they went for Edwin.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat. Like, I think we've talked a lot about like how classes need these really powerful core sets of cards to be powerful and wild, and it felt like Foxy and Swindle and Plunder were kind of getting to that point in Rogue. Like, it's a good set of cards, and I was really scared that they were going to hit one of those. And then it was going to stay nerfed for a while. And I never expected them to nerf Edwin, but I'm glad that they are, especially since they said that they are going to revert the nerf when it does rotate in a few months, which I'm a little excited about.
And something else is that Foxy, Swindle, and Prize, they all come from the most recent set. So like even if they do prove to be like very, very powerful pieces, it's like they're going to have the minimum amount of time in the format, except for the mini set coming up. We'll get into that later maybe. So yeah, that's also something to note. But like you said, it is a little bit of a bummer, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes, and when the big changes happen in a couple months.
Yep. And then the last change that they made for Constructed was Box by Knuckles going from 4 attack to 3. And so this was the kind of the dominant force behind Evolved Shaman in Standard. In the dev notes here, we're lowering the attack on Box by Knuckles in order to cut into the fluidity of all Shaman, increasing the required investment of playing a 5-mana weapon without a free Dread Corsair, which was kind of a big deal. And reduce the overall damage output the deck is capable of over multiple weapon charges, because they all do play the 4/2 Horde Pillager in Standard. This change lowers the amount of explosive plays available to Evolve Shaman, should create an overall healthier meta. I think we talked about this on previous episodes, where cutting it to 3 attack means that you can't play the free Dread Corsair, which means if you can keep their board clear moving into that big turn, it's a lot less explosive. I think this is a fine change. I think Evolve Shaman's still going to be a very strong deck in Standard. Evolve Shaman's not a very strong deck in our format, and it kind of really does rely on stuff like Dread Corsair to have those big pop-off turns. And so I think we'll talk a little bit about the VS report, and the VS report had Evolve Shaman as like a tier 3 deck. I think it's going to be knocked down. You probably aren't going to be able to really play it in its current iteration in our format, which is a little bit unfortunate. But I think it's definitely something that needed to happen for Standard, and something that I hope they eventually revert, just like Edwin, when it rotates to Wild.
Yeah, I'm happy with this nerf. This is the one that I would have suggested, the 3 attack change. I don't know, I just think it addresses a lot of the core problems, so I'm happy they went in this direction. I am, a little surprised that they didn't hit more stuff. You kind of alluded to this at the top of the show, where we only got the 2 nerfs. But my guess is that they just didn't want to kind of go super hard on the nerf stuff with the mini set just a couple of weeks away. And so rather than like preemptively going after things like Bomb Warrior or I guess like War as a whole, they'd kind of maybe let things play out and see, what things look like in 3 weeks' time compared to right now.
I mean, it makes sense why they didn't touch more cards for Standard. And I think, but what's happened, at least on Twitter and Reddit, in the little communities that I have seen, or conversations that I've seen rather, is a lot of people are a little bit frustrated that they didn't even really talk about Wild in the patch notes. They didn't really mention that they were keeping an eye on specific decks to potentially nerf in the future. And a lot of people were a little bit frustrated by that, and a lack of any news of any sort about potential balance for the format.
I wasn't expecting anything, so I wasn't really disappointed, because I never anticipated that we would get a change, no matter how much people were kind of demanding it or desiring some sort of adjustment. But it was interesting, Alec did a talk about Wild when he kind of gave more in-depth stuff on Twitter away from the patch notes. So Alec Dawson, talked about them before, one of the devs, and he always gives like really good insight whenever they do these adjustments. And he was asked about Wild. So we have a few tweets there. Meowth, if you want to go for that.
Yeah, so related to Wild, there was really only one big tweet that kind of stood out. Somebody asked about potential balance changes for Wild, and he responded, "We'll be looking at Wild more frequently throughout the year, setting up some things to help us do that better." Was very vague here, did not specify what these things were or what kind of things they may be. But then he goes on to say, any card release has the chance to shift Wild to some degree. The upcoming mini set being no different. There's some good stuff. And so basically there's kind of 2 big parts here, right? Let's just address the first part. They're going to be looking at WoW more frequently throughout the year. I think that's something that they probably as a dev team have talked about and want to focus a little bit more on compared to the past. That's kind of the feeling that I'm getting from that first part. But the second thing, setting up some things to help us do that better. I don't really know what that means. Are they going to be setting up more ways to analyze data when it comes to the WoW format? Are they going to have like an executive council of Wild players that give advice about the format? Like, what did they mean by that? What do you think?
Yeah, my initial thought was that there would just be, a more defined role in terms of someone on the dev team being more involved with Wild or like more focused on that. I know that a lot of the dev team currently is sort of very, like there's a lot of hands and a lot of like cookie jars, right? Like there are a lot, they do a lot of stuff no matter like who you are. And so maybe it's just like something like that, just like someone on the team kind of taking more focus. It is interesting though, right? Because it says they're setting up something. So I don't know whether that means maybe reaching out to people in terms of the community or being a bit more hands-on in that regard. I kind of don't want to speculate too much because, this is very vague, right? And I kind of don't want to set expectations up in a way that isn't very realistic. But it is interesting, right? I think the more frequently, like we're looking at WoW more frequently throughout the year, that's one of those things where it's kind of like, yeah, I'll sort of see it when I, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah,
I'll believe it when I see it, kind of thing. Yeah. But it is, the second part of that is a good point, right? That the upcoming set is coming out, and there is probably some expectation from the dev team that any problem that's currently in Wild right now, it's such a short time frame that there might be something completely different to worry about in 3 weeks from now. So we'll see how that goes.
I mean, okay. I mean, let's just talk about the mini set a little bit. So I think a lot of people are expecting to come out in about 2 weeks from the posting of this podcast.
Yeah, roughly around the 20th. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of people are setting their expectations for this mini set really high. And I'm just thinking back to like Descent of Dragons or and Galakrond's Awakening was the mini set that came out halfway through. And I think we got 2 cards that were like super impactful. We saw Risky Skipper, obviously, and then we saw like the 3/2 quest card, the Unlicensed Adventurer. Those were kind of like the 2 big standout cards, and they were both very, very good cards. But it was 2 cards, and so I don't want anybody to get their expectations up where we're gonna have like a huge meta shift with this mini set of cards that are coming out in a couple of weeks.
That is true. There were, I think, other things that were very powerful that you just might not recall. Like Cleric of Scales in Priest was something that I think was. Yeah. And there were like another card or 2. It's also like it doesn't take that much for the meta to quote unquote like to shift in a big way, right? It doesn't have to be a ton of cards. So for example, like we're talking about Licensed Adventurer as like the Quest Mage card, but that had a big impact just by itself, right? Like Quest Mage completely took over and the meta looked like quite different than it did before Galakrond's Awakening. So even if like there aren't a ton of cards that make it into Wild, it's the same thing as like this past expansion. We talked so much about how the format wasn't going to look that different, and we felt like it was going to be a very low impact set. But here we are, where things are definitely different, right? Like with a combination of nerfs and releases, things like Kingsmane Rogue popped up, things like Secret Mage have completely like taken over in a lot of ways. So it doesn't have to be like a massive bunch of cards to be impactful.
All right. But yeah, I think just the general consensus from a lot of people was the last time they did nerfs, right? They said that we're keeping an eye on things in Wild. And then here they still like didn't make any changes, and I think a lot of people aren't very happy with that. But I mean, we have nothing really more we can do, right? We're just gonna wait until the mini set, see what cards come out, see kind of how the meta shapes up from there, and then see if they make any balance changes after that. But yeah, so let's talk about the metagame. So we are fortunate enough to actually have another VS report. That's 2-in-1 expansion. That's freaking amazing. So for those of you guys that don't know, Corbett and I do both work on the Wild vs. Syndicate report. Basically, we help produce the written report that you guys see on the website. That's kind of our role. And so, yeah, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be just kind of going through some of the highlights of the VS report. If you guys want kind of a very detailed explanation about a lot of the things that we're talking about today, I highly recommend you guys check out the Vicious Syndicate Wild report. It'll be linked down in the description below. Just click Show More and it'll be right there. But yeah, I mean, before we get into this, I kind of want to just define a lot of the things that we might be talking about here. So first of all, we're going to be talking about frequency of decks. So this is very simple. This is how much of the deck is being played at certain rank thresholds. Okay. And then when we talk about deck power, we're basically talking about win rate of the deck. I think in very simple terms. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, it's the win rate. Yeah.
Okay. And then we're going to be talking about meta score. So this is kind of a combination of a deck's win rate and a deck's popularity on ladder, combined with kind of like its win rate against other decks in the metagame as the theoretical like best deck that you should be playing, right? Where the play rate and the win rate of these decks are the highest. And then we'll be talking about some matchups, right? Some win rates against other popular decks. But let's go ahead and just hop into the first image. So again, for those of you guys that are on mobile, if you guys do want to take a closer look at some of these images, you can check out the Vicious Syndicate report itself, or you can check out our show notes that'll also be linked down in the comments. But yeah, so we're talking about popularity of decks, frequency of decks within Legend for multiple servers. I think what's really standing out to me from the last time we did one of those reports is just about a month ago, before we had Voracious Reader nerfed and before we had Lord Keeper Polkelt nerfed, we kind of had Priest, Secret Mage, Druid, and Warlock all very similar in play rate because Aggro Druid was very, very popular deck. You had, I mean, obviously Warlock is always popular, and Secret Mage hadn't really caught on yet. But what we've seen since the Lorekeeper Polkalt nerf and the Voracious Reader nerf is Priest and Mage have kind of taken off and separated themselves from the rest of the classes in the format right now, especially as Aggro Druid has kind of died off. And Secret Mage right now is at a whopping 16% of the metagame in Legend, that's a lot, by the way. That's a very, very large amount. It's very similar to, I think, what the percentage of Evolved Shaman was a couple weeks ago. Not recently, but a couple weeks ago. It was about this threshold. So it's a very, very popular deck. Followed by Arena Priest, and then Big Priest, actually, we always talk about it as a very popular deck at lower ranks, but it's still a very, very popular deck within Legend as well. But what's really stood out to you outside of, like, Aggro Druid kind of falling off the face of the earth? It used to be a very popular deck, and now it's kind of dead. But has anything else really stood out to you?
I mean, obviously the big thing is Mage, right? Like, so in the previous report, Mage was sitting at around like 6 to 7% play rate, and now it's all the way up to 16. So it's like basically more than doubled, whereas Aggro Druid is halved. That's kind of interesting, I think, where Mage is looking completely different. Like that's the big thing that's sort of like is different now compared to a month ago. The other thing that's kind of noticeable, I think, is Kingsbane Rogue. Previously, when we did the report, Kingsbane Rogue wasn't actually popular enough to make it into our main tier list, and we had to get a low sample. At Legend, it was around, I think, 2% or a bit lower than that. It's kind of picked up a bit. Now it's, one of the more popular decks, I would say, like aside from like the, some of the bigger ones, but it's in that top 7 or 8 kind of played decks.
I think a large part of that Kingsbane popularity increase probably has to do with the decrease in Aggro Druid, right? Because I think Aggro Druid was one of the worst matchups for Kingsbane Rogue, and with that kind of going away and with good matchups into Priest, I think a lot of Kingsbane players are having a lot more fun, at least, playing in the format.
That's true, for sure, with less Aggro Druid. But at the same kind of line of thinking, there's a lot more Mage, right? And Kingsbane doesn't perform particularly well into Mage. It's not that much of a favorable matchup. I think in Kingsbane's case, it was really a situation where it just hadn't like been figured out and like popularized, and people hadn't been hitting high ranks with it as much. Okay. And so with myself, to sort of name drop, like hitting rank 1, and then Martian also hit rank 1 with it. And I think this in general, like, it's become a much more popular deck at very high Legend in particular, because it does match up well with Darkglare Warlock and Reno Priest, which were very, very popular decks kind of towards the end of last month. So I think like with multiple people playing it more at very high ranks, it's sort of trickled down and things like that. But nothing else sort of jumps out a ton. It's interesting though, like looking at the dates for the report, like it's between the 15th and the 2nd. So it's through the back end of last month. Things are already feeling a little bit different, which is kind of funny to me. But maybe it's just like me being at a very specific rank at higher Legend compared to Legend as a whole.
Yeah, I think the big thing is, I mean, Reno Priest and Big Priest have remained super popular. And I think the big shift, in my opinion, is like the decrease in Aggro Druid, obviously. And I think the majority of those players have kind of swapped to the next best aggressive deck, which has been Secret Mage. Because I feel like you have comparable like rise in the amount of Secret Mages as you do the decrease in Aggro Druids. And the decrease in Aggro Druids has changed the metagame a little bit, right? Odd Paladin's a little bit more popular. Kingsbane Rogue is a lot more popular now. And so I think that has something to do with it. But, I mean, in general, I don't think there's a huge shift in the metagame outside of, like, people have, like, in the past report, people knew what the good decks were. People were playing the good stuff. I think now people are playing even more of maybe the best deck in the format when it comes to Secret Mage, right?
Yeah, I think that's it, right? Where people, like you said, already had figured out. It's just now we've shifted even further towards that, that very, very, very top deck.
Yep. All right, so let's, I mean, we've kind of spoiled it a little bit, but let's talk about our power rankings. So we're talking deck power here is just basically representative of a deck's win rate. Sitting in tier 1, at the top of tier 1 is probably no surprise, Secret Mage. Okay, it was barely the top deck in our last report. I think it was edging out Reno Priest by like a 1/10 of a percentage point. In the last month, it has separated itself from the rest of the pack by a million miles. It's about 2.5 higher of a win rate than the next best deck right now, which is Odd Paladin. Secret Mage, best deck in the format by a million miles. No one could have seen this coming. Totally not Corbett in an episode that we showed 3 weeks ago. Totally not.
Dude,
yeah,
I had that clip. I had that clip playing in my head. I was like, "Meowth, you better like fade me to black and replay it." But yeah, Mage kind of ridiculous right now. Really insane. I was kind of baffled when I saw what the numbers were when we were kind of given the stuff to write the report.
I don't know if you remember my response, dude. You sent me the picture and I was just like,
what?
55? Like, that's approaching like tier S category, right? Like, I think, honestly, I know Vicious Syndicate has the way that it groups decks, but right now I felt like Secret Mage could have been in a tier of its own and nobody would have batted an eye. Like, Secret Mage right now is so much better than any other deck in the format, from what we're seeing in our sample size, and it's not even close, right? 2.5 percentage points might not seem like that big of a deal, but it's a huge deal in the grand scope of entire archetypes, in Legends. So
yeah, it really is. It's a massive deal. This is an absurd win rate. So yeah, like everything else, usually at the very start of an expansion has a kind of an inflated win rate, right? So things like Odd Paladin or whatever tier 1 deck is, they generally are a bit higher at around like 53, 54. So those things have all kind of tracked down, which is normal. It is absurd that Secret Mage has sort of maintained. It's actually increased its win rate.
It's increased its win rate by I think 2%.
Which is kind of crazy. I think it's really just a combination. Like we get into it to like more detail in the report, but with the nerfs happening and Mage becoming a lot more refined, like that's it. Like the Mage build was figured out. People were stopping like not playing double rigged fair game. People are now playing double rigged fair game. And just other stuff got nerfed, and that's just the way it works now. Mage is like completely uncontested at the top of the tier list there.
Yeah, I mean, let me just fill out the rest of these tier lists for you guys that are just listening to us. Tier 1, we've got Secret Mage at 55%, Odd Paladin coming at 52.5%, Kingsbane and Darkglare wrap up the bottom of Tier 1 at 52% win rates. Rena Priest and Discard Warlock and Pirate Warrior are basically high Tier 2 right now, with like 51.5% win rates. And then followed at the bottom of Tier 2 by Rena Lock and Big Priest. And then when we get into Tier 3, Tier 4, we're getting into kind of the off-meta stuff, the jank.
Yeah.
Like Tier 3, I think, is highlighted by the nerfed Aggro Druid. Aggro Druid kind of fall from grace. Just Voracious Vader was a huge hit. And then Odd Demon Hunter kind of just, it's never really, like it had Dreadlord's Bite nerfed, and it got Voracious Reader, but that's just not had an impact on the list at all. And then Tier 4, I think, every time I look at this now and I see Quest Mage, I'm just like, damn, I used to hate this deck that much, and now it sucks this bad. It's kind of insane. But yeah, I mean,
are there any? I was about to ask, like, what are the decks that sort of stand out to you? That like, what are the most interesting things to you in this like tier list?
So, I mean, I talk a lot of smack about Rena Lock, I think. I know I talk a lot of smack about Rena Lock because I just don't think it's very good. And what we saw when we're looking at the Vicious Syndicate report, the data that they sent us was that Rena Lock has now kind of developed into a good win rate against Rena Priest, like a favorable win rate against Rena Priest.
Yeah, it's that damn Finley package, dude.
Yeah, I mean, so now
Finley.
I talked about it a little bit, when I was writing up the Warlock session. Every Rena Lock now has kind of adopted this package of Priest hate. Right, they're running Grizzle Wizard Finley, they're running Gnome Feratu, they're running Dirty Rats, which are basically staples. I don't really know if I can call that a tech card anymore. But now everybody's like, people are cutting Void Callers so that they can run Ticketus and can not have to deal with it getting pulled, and that which blows my mind. But people are doing it, and what it has resulted in is Rena Lock beats Rena Priest fairly consistently now, but at the expense of losing a lot of percentage points against matchups that it's historically been really, really good against. So if you look at the matchup spread for Rena Lock, it's unfavored against Odd Paladin, dude. Like, never something that I thought I would hear. You have Despicable Dreadlord, right? One of the best cards in that matchup. Like, it's not very good against Secret Mage. It's not very good against Big Priest. It's not very good against, like, Discard Warlock. Like, these matchups... Hey,
but it's still pretty good.
I mean,
it's still pretty good overall.
Well, when it beats up on the deck that has the second highest meta share in Legend, you're gonna have a decent win rate. But it's just kind of crazy to me, kind of how the shift in philosophy of Arena Lock has kind of changed in just the past month.
Yeah, the two decks that kind of stood out to me when looking at this, apart from Mage, it was Dark Lair Warlock and Reno Priest. I think those are the most interesting. So Dark Lair Warlock, we have it at the fourth best at Legend, very close to the other two, Odd Pal and Kingsbane. At Diamond 4-1, it's actually the second best. The interesting thing about Dark Lair Warlock is that I kind of looked at how the meta has shifted in terms of Dark Lair Warlock's like favorable matchups and unfavorable matchups, and how like those decks have changed in popularity. The meta got way more hostile towards Dark Lair Warlock, but the win rate went up. Like the meta has gotten so much more hostile in terms of like Secret Mage is now highly popular. Kingsbane has kind of popped up a ton more. It sort of lost the ability to like feast on some of these things like Jade Druid, and like Reno Warlock, I suppose, is kind of a bit less popular than where it was. And odd so there are a whole bunch of like these changes, right? But the deck got a lot better, and I think that it gained a fair amount in these random matchups, and that's largely due to build. So I would be interested to see where Dark Lair win rate would be if the quote unquote good builds were like universal.
So you're talking about power overwhelmings and cheaty ankle biters being kind of
the cheaty ankle biter package.
Yeah.
I like Dark Lair Warlock is obviously a very strong deck, and it would be my personal idea of the second best deck in the format, or like one of the top two decks. But it has been pretty incredible for the deck to keep going up in win rate despite the meta becoming theoretically more hostile towards it.
So I would like to bring up a point about Dark Lair Warlock. So there were old builds that were running like Cult Neophytes and the Grim Rallies. Do you think the Cult Neophytes ever make a way back into Dark Lair list, or have they kind of evolved past it? Right? Because I wonder how impactful the Cult Neophytes are against Secret Mage specifically, is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think they're horrific against Mage. I think the cults were previously mostly a priest tech, and I think that with the build kind of going towards like Leroy in this burst package, that's kind of already the way that Dark Lair has improved the priest matchup, which has been significant, right? Like it's gone better in that matchup. So I doubt it goes back. I think the build is actually very figured out for the most part. Dark Lair Warlock feels quite refined compared to where it was, even just a few weeks ago. But yeah, the other one that I thought was super interesting was Reno Priest, right?
Yeah.
Where Reno Priest, the tyrant of the meta, top of tier 2.
Well, for what it's worth,
in the legend tier list.
The win rates of like Odd Paladin at second and Reno Priest in fifth isn't that drastic,
close,
right? They are very close.
They are close. But at the same time, Reno Priest has definitely dipped in performance, right? There are a lot of matchups where it has gotten a lot worse. It's not just about the overall win rate, right? It's looking at how the specific matchups have gotten worse. It lost a ton of ground against Secret Mage, like a ridiculous amount. As that kind of deck.
I think the big thing with Reno Priest against Secret Mage is it can't proc Rig Free game. And so Secret Mage gets to draw so much early in the game. And what that does against Priest is it just allows you constant waves of pressure, right? And the ability to refill. And Reno Priest the current builds don't really have the access to clear that. And I think actually a kind of an underrated aspect of Reno Priest right now is it used to be really, really good against Aggro Druid. Now Aggro Druid's kind of gone, and as a result you've seen an uptick in Kingsbane, which is kind of a bad matchup for Reno Priest right now, because a lot of them aren't running Mindrender or Lucia. And so there's no real ways to interact with the Kingsbane that way. And so I would say I think the meta as a whole has gotten more hostile to Reno Priest, but I'm not at the point where I'm I don't think it's no longer a tier 1 deck. I think what's happening is go ahead.
I think it's very good, but it's a combination of the Polk Out nerf, the deck still feeling a lot of hate. There's a lot of hate in this data towards Reno Priest. And so I was talking about how this is sort of the back end of last month and how the meta feels different. I already feel there's less Reno Priest than there was a week or two ago. And so it'll be interesting to see if Reno Priest either shifts its build, sort of counteract Mage and these other decks and stuff. And if it gets less targeted, we'll see if that win rate spikes up a little bit after the Polk Out nerf and everything.
Yeah, we were talking. Okay, so first of all, the Polk Out nerf has impacted the deck. We talk about this more detailed in the actual report. The Polk Out nerf has impacted Reno Priest, so it has slowed it down a step. But I think the real thing is the rest of the meta has kind of caught up to teching and playing decks that are decent into it already, and then teching for it. And we were just talking about like Renalock, for example, is like one of those decks, where like the popular build of Renalock is like teching completely super hard for Reno Priest. And I think what you're going to see over the next month, so if we have another VS report that comes out, let's say at the beginning of February, I think what you're going to actually see is a lot of decks now targeting Secret Mage, right? Whether that's Kazan Mystics, Eater Secrets. Those are kind of the two big ways to counter Secret Mage.
I had a terrible thought today. I almost don't want to share it.
Well, now you have to.
I almost put Kazan Mystic in my Secret Mage. I thought about it for a moment.
Would you argue?
I'm sorry.
I honestly, I wrote it in the VS report. I was like, with as powerful as Secret Mage is and as popular as it is, this may be one of the few times that tech cards are like actually warranted. So I don't hate you that much, but I will say, let's kind of discuss this a little bit. So there's two big tech cards for Secret Mage, right? There's Kazan Mystic and there's Eater of Secrets. I'm personally in the boat. I think Kazan Mystic, if you were playing Secret Mage itself or another kind of aggressive deck, I think Kazan Mystic is a little bit better of a tech card choice, because tempo, right? Tempo of stealing their secrets, stealing the card draw, preventing 4/4s, I think, is making them have to play around it themselves, I think, is better than the Eater of Secrets. Would you be on board with saying that?
I think that specifically Secret Mage probably would prefer the Kazan, but I think a lot of decks would actually prefer the Eater.
Really?
I really do. It's tough to say, right? These cards are like, it's going to depend on what population Mage ends up getting to. And it's hard to get information on this kind of thing. It's really hard to like differentiate between crappy tech versus crappy tech that is somehow justified. But my guess is that for decks like Reno Lock or Priest, I would assume the Eater of Secrets is actually probably the better option.
Ugh, I hate that. All right. And so let's dive into meta score for a little bit. We talked a lot about deck powers. The meta score, again, is a combination where you take into account both the deck's popularity and frequency and their win rates against the rest of the field. And so here, I think, is where you see kind of what are the best decks if you want to climb, right? This is kind of how I always interpret meta score. And Secret Mage by far and away the best deck, followed by Reno Priest, and then Big Priest, and then Reno Lock. I think Reno Lock mainly due to the popularity of Reno Priest, and Reno Priest still being a very good deck. And so let's actually, I know we moved on to this, but let's just go ahead and dive into the actual matchup rates, because I think it's a little bit more interesting to talk about than the meta scores. Was there anything here that kind of stood out to you as being kind of a little bit counterintuitive to what you've heard from a lot of people when it comes to like matchups into specific decks? Maybe specifically Secret Mage is the big one.
Yeah, I kind of like talked about earlier, but the Mage versus Priest matchup is the big one. Where people had asked about me like a week or two ago, like how I felt about the matchup a lot of the time, and I was like, I think it's at worst even, and if anything leads towards Mage. And a lot of people kind of disagree. They're like, what are you talking about? It's like Priest favored. But the information that we have says that this is like actually a pretty firm Mage favored matchup. Like Mage feels really good when it cues. Like it feels good when it cues into Reno Priest. And so yeah, that was sort of it was nice to kind of see that, but also a little terrifying. So that one stood out a bit. What else? There was let's see. I'm just kind of having a glance through now. My biggest thing that I was interested by was just sort of how the matchups change for some of the Nerf decks. So things like Aggro Druid, just like it lost so much percentage against random stuff. Like Aggro Druid, just like a firm unfavorable against Darklair Warlock, whereas previously it was kind of even.
It used to be like one of the decks that people would call a counter to Darklair Warlock.
Yeah,
right?
Previously.
It used to be a counter to Odd Paladin. Like it was the counter to Odd Paladin because you just got on board faster. Than now it's an unfavorable matchup. Yeah, that's kind of insane.
Yeah, but in terms of everything else is sort of like mostly in line with where we previously had it in the VS report. It was nice to get some more information on Kingsbane, right? Because Kingsbane, we didn't have matchup data on that specifically. God, it is incredible looking at how Kingsbane just gets thumped by the Odd Paladin. So yeah, that matchup's rough. But yeah, everything else is pretty stock. What about you? Apart from you talked about the Reno Lock into Priest matchup. Was there much else that sort of like super stood out to you?
Well, so Secret Mage. I mean, I always how do you beat the best deck in the format, right? That's always what I'm asking myself.
Mm.
And what kind of stood out to me was the fact that like right now, out of the popular decks in the metagame, of course, let it be known that VS Report doesn't have data, sufficient data for every deck out there, right? So there's going to be some decks that we might be missing. But as we can see, like Pirate Warrior is like quote unquote the best matchup into Secret Mage right now, which is very interesting. Whereas like Pirate Warrior is like kind of holding its own against a lot of decks in the metagame, actually, kind of surprisingly. A lot of like even matchups, slightly favored, slightly unfavored. And so it tells me that something might be there with Pirate Warrior to take a look at. But then something that was kind of missing, and I wish we had information on, was Odd Warrior, because we talked a little bit about this in the Syndicate report. The Chinese servers have kind of adopted Odd Warrior as like it counters Dark Lair Warlock pretty effectively, and it's a decent matchup into Secret Mage. It does lose matchup points into Arena Priest, right? That's a matchup that's never really been good once Arena Priest players kind of figure out how to play that matchup. But with Arena Priest, we talked about if Arena Priest kind of decreases in popularity because a lot of bad matchups and bad techs are prevalent in the metagame, Odd Warrior might be something that the Western servers should probably look at and see as like a potential strong counter to the metagame. Odd Warrior has like the really weird issues where like auto loses against a lot of decks, unfortunately. But it's a very much a key simulator deck, but it might be kind of the savior of the metagame right now, and a deck to kind of keep an eye on, because if Pirate Warrior has a decent matchup into Secret Mage, maybe Odd Warrior, maybe Warrior twice in the span of like 8 months is going to be our savior of the format. We'll see.
I had a rough time today when I tried Odd Warrior, because I was thinking the same lines, right? I was like, oh yeah, Odd Warrior, yeah, let's try it out, a counter. And then I queued into Reno Uther Paladin, and I just conceded on the spot, and I was like, oh right, that's why I don't play this deck, because it just loses to like random jank like 30% of the time, like that you're not thinking about. Just people play weird stuff in Wild Ladder, man.
Yeah,
like people play the weird jank,
and
weird jank just destroys Odd Warrior.
I mean, Odd Warrior is one of those decks where like it'll auto win a lot of matchups. Like if you queue into a matchup that you're favored in, you're gonna win that matchup like 80-90% of the time. But when you queue into a matchup you're not favored in, no, not really.
I actually feel like Odd Warrior might not be as good into aggro as people think.
Well, I mean, I'm just like, I guess maybe I'm talking about like good matchups in general. Like, I think Odd Warrior into Even Shaman, right? As an example, like Even Shaman very rarely wins that matchup unless the Odd Warrior kind of like wastes all of its removal.
That's true. I'm looking at things like currently played more, like things like Odd Paladin, right? Like Lothraxian, can solo that matchup, for example. And I think like Secret Mage, for example, like the amount of with rigged fair game and the amount of generation that you have and the amount of mid game pressure with Conjurers, like I think that matchup's probably actually a lot closer than people might think as well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when I talk about Odd Warrior, I'm just scared about like there are also a lot of matchups that are kind of just auto loss, right? Like when you come into a big place, you're conceding the moment you see like the second palm reading because you can't win that matchup. And of course, like honestly, even like Reno Lock is probably like a pretty poor matchup now with Ticketus kind of being super popular, and so that's kind of my big issue that I always maintain with Odd Warrior. But if Secret Mage right now it's a 16% meta share in Legend, if it's jumping up to 20, maybe 25%, after the support, then honestly maybe you sacrifice some of those matchups because it has a decent shot into Secret Mage, which is not something a lot of decks can say, right? Which is kind of the big deal.
Yeah. It is interesting. Like this is the first time I think in a long time where Reno Priest is not the public enemy, and it's going to be Mage. Mage is now the public enemy. Previously, we've shifted towards the Grizzled Wizard package and like just a whole bunch of weird tech to try and handle Priest. Let's see how Mage handles a little bit of Secret Tech. I think Secret Tech is going to come back in a relatively big way, sort of either once this report is published and people get that information out there, or just like naturally, like people just start getting frustrated and start like putting it in regardless.
Double Kazan Mystic, double Eater every deck.
yeah, we'll go the full Secret suite. It'll be good.
But yeah, guys, that's gonna be it for us. If you guys, we talked a lot about the highlights, but if you guys want to take a read for yourself, again, the link is down in the description. We highly recommend you guys check it out. Again, Corbett and I do a lot of the not a lot. We do all the writing for these VS reports. So let us know. Let us know if you guys enjoy it. Let us know your thoughts and feels about the VS report. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We State of the Wild episodes every Sunday now. We've got some special stuff planned for you guys this year. Some exciting stuff. So if you guys enjoy these episodes, make sure you guys drop a subscription and hit the little notification bell so that you guys know when future episodes go live. And just a reminder that we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all your podcast distributors. So if you like to listen on the go, make sure you guys check us out there. Corbett, thank you again for joining me, dude. Let the people know where they can find you.
Guys, you can find me at CorbettGames on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, all that good stuff. So yeah, come check it out, and hope you enjoyed the listen.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys watching. We hope you all enjoyed. Stay safe out there, and we will see you guys next time. Later.
Bye.